These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today here on Market Journal. We're just outside of Beatrice, Nebraska, and for today's show, there's quite a buzz in the air. Quite literally, folks. We're talking about the bees just behind me a little bit later in the broadcast. Also coming up, an update on Japanese beetle activity around the state. We'll also dive into the grain markets with DTN's Todd Hultman and get a look at what's trending in the world of weather. Those stories are straight ahead, but first, the U.S. Department of Agriculture projected a big jump in winter wheat harvesting here in Nebraska over the past week. Harvest is now estimated by USDA at 70% complete. We'll begin today's show by heading out to western Nebraska and checking in on dryland wheat grower Andrew Terrell.
For this week's In the Field update, we're checking in on wheat harvest out here in the panhandle of Nebraska. Andrew, kind enough to join us as we are just to the east of Angora, north of Bridgeport, south of Alliance. And Andrew, catching you as you guys are in the field, just getting started with your wheat harvest. How are things going thus far?
Oh, I'm hoping it gets better from here.
Let's back up, talk about the growing season for your winter wheat crop this year. How did you fare moisture-wise leading to where you're at now harvest?
We had some timely rains. We've had moisture. It's been adequate, but we could always use a little more.
As you've gotten into this field, yield-wise, is it what you were hoping for?
Not yet. Not yet. First of it was really poor, but it's getting better as we go.
You shared me. You have dry land wheat, and out here in the panhandle, you really got to be hoping for those timely rains. The typical year, what does your wheat yield?
Oh, 30, 35 is probably pretty average.
Yep. So this year, looking so far what you've been in, about that average or a little above?
I think we can get there.
Okay. Well, tell me about the farming operation. How long have you been involved?
Well, since I was a kid, but I come back to the farm in probably 15, 16. I worked in town as a mechanic and then come back to the farm and help my dad and got some ground rented and have some cows and whatnot.
Did you always know you wanted to farm?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep, since I was a little kid.
Yeah. You guys have the wheat that's behind us ready to harvest now. What else do you have for crops?
I have oat and barley mix for some forage, some sorghum sedan for forage.
Okay. How are those crops looking?
The oats and barley look really good. The sorghum we got put in here the first of the month, and it's coming up. It went into pretty good moisture, so it should be all right.
On last week's show, we saw some hail damage in central Nebraska where you guys are out here in the panhandle. I guess we'll knock on wood while talking about that, but where do you sit at the moment? Anybody catching hail?
We caught a little bit at my dad's house. It banged it up a little bit, so we'll see. It's going to be the last we cut since it got hurt a little.
Some people look forward to harvest. Others just ready to get through once they get started. Where do you fall in that spectrum?
It was hard to get ready this year, I guess, with the crop prices, but it's something I enjoy. I like getting the weed out and doing the combine. And
what else do you want to mention? I haven't had the chance to ask you about yet, Andrew.
Oh, that's probably about it. I just enjoy the farming. I enjoy the whole aspect, the life of it.
Spoken like a true farmer. Sure appreciate Andrew letting me swing by his operation for that in the field update. Looking back to last week, you might remember we were in the Minden, Nebraska area where hail had completely destroyed thousands of acres of crops. The damage this year has not just been limited to one area. Many producers across the state being impacted by both hail and flooding. Bill Dodd recently caught up with a pair of extension educators to get some of their advice on how producers should be responding.
Throughout the summer months, rain and hail have been a big hurdle for many Nebraska crop producers to clear. If your operation has been impacted by recent storms, there are several things to pay attention to as you work with your insurance adjusters.
The first thing is just basically to go out and assess those fields. Know that crop insurance is probably going to wait about 7 to 10 days. And the reason for that is just to see if any new regrowth occurs. For soybeans, whether they're reduced to sticks or whether there's any growth still there, it just gives them a better indication about if there could be any recovery. For corn, we're looking at also how bacteria sets into that stalk. So it may change the way that that stalk is able to continue to stand if we get additional wind in between that time of when the hailstorm happened and when that assessment takes place. There may be other plants that fall over or break over. If it was prior to tassel, it allows that adjuster to look at, first of all, if it was broke off above the ear, looking at how the ear then is developing, and if there's potential for it to pollinate. If it was broke off below the ear, that's an easy call because there's no recovering from that. If it was broke off towards the top of the plant and it was just more stripping, then you watch how the tassels come out and are they going to produce pollen.
Hail is usually associated with heavy rains. However, heavy rains without hail can also lead to another set of problems altogether.
The hard thing with this time of year is we're in a waiting game. You're waiting to see how long it's going to take for those flood and ponded areas to recede, how long it's going to take. One big component is for documentation. If you're able to take pictures that are able to have time dates of when the flooding occurred, how big of an area, drone images are a great asset to have to be able to get a better idea of total area. And then, of course, reach out to your crop insurance adjuster. Make sure you take a look at your crop insurance to see if your insurance covers flooding loss or if it's more drought related or hail event type related losses that are associated with your crop insurance. So those are some big things to keep in mind. Also, if you're able to get those pictures, then be able to overlay those on top of your yield monitor maps will be very beneficial as we get into September and October.
Whether you're dealing with flooding or hail damage on your operation, these kind of stressors can take a big psychological toll on people. Dealing with losses like this can be difficult, but there are resources available to help you navigate these difficult times.
One is called Hail No, and on that website, producers and ag industry professionals will see recordings that talk about how does crop insurance go out and do their adjustments, what are some things they're looking for so that the producer can understand as well. It also goes through options for forages, things like that. We also have a number of resources on CropWatch that talk about the stress and the mental wellness aspect of this, because it truly is hard. It's a loss to see the crops destroyed, especially when they're totaled, and then you see it the rest of the season. So just acknowledge that there is that loss, and it is important to be talking to other people, and there are those resources on the front page of CropWatch.
Unfortunately, when the skies clear and the waters recede, you will be in a bit of a waiting game. However, while you're waiting, be sure to keep thorough records and keep in communication with your insurance adjusters. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
If you'd like to learn more about some of your options after hail or flooding, be sure you bookmark the website cropwatch.unl.edu. Up next, I mentioned there's a certain buzz in the air. It's being caused by millions of honeybees that call this farm their home. Joining me now is beekeeper of this farm, Kevin Monfelt at Bee Bum. Kevin, appreciate the time today. Interested to hear how you got started with honeybees.
Well, it started as a hobby about 10 years ago, Bryce. I was in construction at that time, and one of my friends suggested that I needed a hobby. And so I bought a box of bees. My wife was shocked. She had no idea that I was getting them. And then they showed up, and it just has snowballed from there. We operate about 300 colonies right now. Our short-term goal is to be around 400 the next year or so.
It's a lot of honeybees. Try to put it in perspective. How many bees are in each one of these colonies?
This time of year, there's probably somewhere around 45 or 50,000 bees in there. So
we add all that up, comes to that million number I mentioned.
yeah, a lot of bees, a lot of bees.
How do you go from hobby to commercial beekeeper?
I don't know. It just kind of happened. We've been very blessed. Everything, we couldn't have planned this to turn out the way that it has. I mean, there's been so many people that have helped us on our journey, and the farm that we're actually on was my wife's grandparents' place. My father-in-law grew up here, so a lot of family history for us, so it's great for us to be here. We love it. But as far as we just, we started that first year with one hive. A few years later, we were up to around 12 or 13. And then we started dabbling in different products. We first was just giving our honey to our friends and family. And then we started selling things. And I wanted to do something different than what other people were doing. I wanted to do things just besides plain honey. So I really started studying creamed honey and infused honey. And those really are our gold mark products that we have here. I'm very proud of our creamed honey. We have about 18 different flavors throughout the year. We just came out with a new one called Lime and the Coconut, and it's really popular already. It's only been out a week, so we sold out of it at 2 events this weekend. So it's pretty crazy how things go, but yeah.
There's a lot of unique things about what you do, and I've been able to learn about them over the past couple of years getting to know you, Kevin. But one of those things is the fact that you take some of your beehives and travel south for the winter. Why do you do that?
Well, it's so that our bees will build up and be ready to split a little earlier than they would be if we left them here. So we sell new colonies to other beekeepers or people wanting to get into beekeeping. So a nucleus colony is just 5 frames of bees, brood, and a queen. Laying queen, and so we sell those. Typically they start going out the 3rd week of April, and this year they went for a long time. I think we didn't finish. We had some onesie twosies that went out all the way until like June, so yeah.
Well, I appreciate the insights. What else is fascinating you want to share with us here today on Market Journal?
We're not just a beekeeping operation here. We also raise sweet corn and pumpkins that we have for sale here. So we're just kind of a little multifaceted 10-acre farm that we're just trying to keep things going.
Now, you might not know this, but Nebraska's state insect since 1975 is the honeybee. They pollinate over 90 crops here in the state, including alfalfa, sunflowers, and watermelons, which are worth about $10 billion each year. Honey production also estimated about a $4 million industry here in the state. We go from honeybees to corn and soybeans now. It is that time of the show where we talk markets, and joining the show this week is Todd Hultman from DTN. Here's our conversation. Todd, I'm sure as you're a writer every day for DTN, you've come up with a lot of adjectives to describe the markets as you see them right now. Maybe an adjective or two to describe how you see the grain markets right now.
Well, the word that jumps out at me this week, Bryce, is derecho, a word that, we don't very often see. I never heard of before 4 years ago when it flattened the fields in Iowa, but it was another derecho storm that we dealt with this week. And I think that's maybe a good description of how hard the spec crowd has also hit corn and soybean prices this year.
Here in the middle of the week, corn and soybeans kind of continue on their trajectory where they're at, but wheat was a leader to the upside, trying to drag corn maybe along with it. What's the story in wheat right now?
The good news for wheat here on Wednesday especially, we're seeing higher prices from a drier forecast for the northwestern plains and also the western Canadian prairies. And it looks like temperatures are going to get fairly hot the next several days, especially on the western end of that province. At the same time, Bryce, we had a US dollar break some significant lows here today. There's a little more excitement that there could be a rate cut finally happening in September. And so the market's pulling back the dollar. That's good news for grain prices and US commodity prices in general, but especially helps our wheat prices compete with those in Europe.
Okay, over to corn we go. Let's talk about the price action there on the futures market for corn. And maybe you brought up on your daily commentary as part of DTN highlighting demand for corn right now when it comes to ethanol has been really good. Shed a light on that.
Bryce, it's been fantastic all year. I mean, our ethanol production level is up roughly 4% from a year ago. And of course, we're talking about making money with $4 corn, which is much easier for ethanol plants to do than they could a year ago when we had $6.50 corn. Just this week, we came out with a new report from the Energy Department, and we came within a whisker of setting another weekly production for ethanol. So the plant margins couldn't be better right now. It's helping hold up the basis for corn. We have a very strong basis nationally, but especially those prices in Iowa, where the ethanol bids are very active, is holding up very well on the cash side of things. We just haven't been able to convince the specs on the future side of the market of corn's good value.
Is that a pretty similar story when it comes to soybeans, Todd?
Yes, it is. And really, in fact, it's even more bullish for soybean demand when you look domestically, Bryce. The crush margins right now are in a situation where we've seen the soy products hold their values rather steady the past month, while specs continue to sell off soybean prices to their lowest levels in 3.5 years. That wide divergence has really made a phenomenal return for any processor that wants to buy soybeans right now, crush them, and sell the meal and oil. That spread based on August futures prices here on Wednesday was $2.36 a bushel. That's some of the best spreads the processors have seen since last summer.
Todd, I want to get to a viewer question that came in this week. Aaron had a question. Comes to the U.S. election. There's a lot of chatter on this front happening this week, really since the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. There's some assumptions out there that perhaps his re-election bid might be a little bit stronger at this point following the events over the weekend. To that point, Aaron's question was about what happens perhaps in the grain markets. What kind of indicators do the trade think might happen in the grain markets if former President Donald Trump is reelected? Your thoughts?
Well, I think the first concern that everybody has is what's our relationship going to look like with China moving forward? And of course, we recall his first term, and we had quite a tariff battle with China at the time, and they really held back on buying soybeans from us. And of course, we're still quite dependent on soybean exports to China. I will say, no matter who is elected, that's still going to be a concern moving forward. And even though Brazil continues to increase their production year after year and send more of those soybeans to China, China still is not in a situation where they can do without us completely. I mean, to get through the year, they still need U.S. soybeans. So that's going to be a contention, and as I see it, really no matter who the president is on that side.
Just want to throw this out there, particularly for corn and soybeans. Do you think we might be finding a bottom here at these prices we're observing right now in the futures?
I absolutely do, and I'm very encouraged in soybeans, not by any price action I've seen yet. It still looks horrible when you look at the chart. But our September FOB prices at the U.S. Gulf are now about 40 cents a bushel cheaper than those in Paranagua, Brazil. That's happening fairly earlier than usual in the season, and it leads me to suspect that China's going to need to start buying U.S. soybeans here fairly soon, and definitely by the time we get to fall. So I think we have a very strong demand case to scare some specs out of their short side on the beans. And on corn, it's just overdone. And I don't think the production is out there that USDA is estimating yet. And the problems aren't really going to surface in reports probably until September, may not until November. So it's going to be a real question mark what kind of production we have this year.
Coming up next week, we'll be joined by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Elliot Dennis. As always, we invite your questions here on the show, so if you have one for Elliot, go ahead and email us, and I'll pass your question right along. Onboarding and training new farm employees is an important job. It's where the mission and goals of the farm are shared with new hires, along with a detailed job description and crucial training on specific duties. There are many steps to a successful onboarding process, and you can learn all of those steps in the July issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It's time to check on weather now with Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, we got a bit of a break from the heat this week, but how are things shaping up as we look to the week ahead?
Thanks, Rex. That break will continue for at least a few more days across most of the state, which is nice. The slow-moving trough will be kind of the main weather player the early portion of the week. That'll keep temperatures cooler and will also give us a chance of showers and thunderstorms across a good portion of the state during Sunday and Monday. The WPC is not particularly bullish on most of the state picking up that much moisture from this, but some isolated pockets might pick up a quarter to half inch, maybe 3/4 inch of rain between Sunday morning and Monday evening. Temperatures will definitely be on the cooler side, though, the first portion of the week, particularly the further southeast in the state you go. This is going to be more of a reflection of it being more cloudy and maximum temperatures staying 10 to 15 degrees below their seasonal averages, so the humidity will still be a bit higher than average. As we move to a later portion of the week, we'll be back under the influence of ridging across the north-central U.S. This will bring back the heat to a point, particularly in western Nebraska. I think we might be flirting with 100 degrees by the end of the week across, say, Alliance and Chadron. And most of the rest of the state can expect temperatures probably back at least in the upper 80s, probably getting into the lower, maybe even mid-90s. But by early, late next weekend, though, we'll be watching a trough moving into the western U.S. And assuming that this actually is valid, with Bermuda High being here closer to Florida, pumping up some moisture, there's going to be chances of some showers and thunderstorms, potentially even some severe weather by the end of this next week. So something to watch out for, particularly the eastern 2/3 of the state and into Iowa. European model shows a pretty good chance of 1 inch or more moisture. This also shows up in the GFS across the eastern half of the state. Unfortunately, western Nebraska not expected to pick up nearly as much moisture the next 7 to 10 days. At 8 to 14 day outlook, CPC keeps that area dry. This also is reflected in the European model. GFS is a little bit better across the Panhandle, but definitely shows some drier conditions across other parts of western and central Nebraska. CPC for temperature shows above average favored toward the end of the month. This is agreed with by the European model. Also the GFS, although the GFS is a little bit more seasonal toward the very eastern side of the state. The CPC also has a slight risk of excessive heat across the very extreme northwestern portion of Nebraska for the last week of the month. In terms of recent precipitation, now we have had some beneficial moisture in parts of the Panhandle and other parts of western Nebraska the last week, but most places haven't picked up a significant amount of precipitation. This precipitation we saw here in central Nebraska on Tuesday also came at the expense of having some additional hail and wind damage. Speaking of crops issues, we do have some tar spots to report across portions of southeastern and east central Nebraska, and unfortunately also have noticed some southern rust creeping in the state here in the last few days as well. Drought monitor, we do see some expansion of abnormal dryness across the southern Panhandle and across portions of southwestern Nebraska. Still seeing moderate drought across other portions of the Panhandle. Probably getting pretty close to seeing some severe drought creeping into portions of Sioux County. Definitely showing some stress on rangelands across most of the Panhandle and into parts of southwestern Nebraska. Pretty good conditions here on the eastern side of the Sandhills, though. Crop conditions, generally pretty good conditions here in the east. Poor conditions in the west. Quick dry also shows a little bit of dryness here creeping into parts of northeastern Nebraska, certainly showing the dryness in western Nebraska. Stress degree days above average across the Panhandle and portions of southwestern Nebraska, but generally relatively good everywhere else. Soil moisture, generally speaking, kind of about normal for this time of year. Soil temperatures mid-70s to low 80s, and temperature and precip rounded for the last week. Thanks. Back to you, Bryce.
Alrighty, thank you very much for that update, Eric. Finally today, if you've been out and in the soybean fields lately, you've probably noticed that Japanese beetles have emerged here in Nebraska. This particular pest has been on the rise and seen more frequently around the state over the last several years. Market Journal's Mike Straub brings us this story. Mike.
Japanese beetles, a fairly decently sized beetle. It's got white tufts across its butt. The only thing it's really similar to is sand chafers. They don't have that, but they are attracted to people that are wearing light clothing, so sometimes people get them confused. But Japanese beetle has those distinct white tufts and kind of an emerald green appearance to it. You know, they catch a lot of attention because of how they feed. They feed on the upper part of the canopy. And so just walking around here, it's not hard to find plants that are infested or look like they're infested just from those leaves being all chewed up, but the veins still intact. I think it's because they feed on the upper part of the canopy. People see that and they're like, oh man, that's got to be hurting my soybeans, so high up in the canopy, so much leaf material missing. And the trouble is it's the whole plant. So you've got to take that plant kind of apart in pieces to really understand, is it going to impact yield? Do I need to spray? Am I at threshold? The key thing is to break this plant into kind of 3 sections. Top of the canopy, we'll call this top. Tear this leaf off, and we'll just take a closer look at this one for a second. We've got 3 leaves here. This leaf's probably the least defoliated. This one's the most. Between these two, it's kind of hard to tell. So we tear off the least and the most and the least defoliated, and we're left with 1 to evaluate. Now, a lot of people would look at this leaf and say, "Oh man, that's really defoliated." But the key thing to do is kind of break this into 4 sections and slide all the areas that are defoliated into one part. So if I do that, it's probably 10% in this one, maybe 10% or 5% here. We're probably down to 5% here, and maybe 10 over here. So overall, probably 10% defoliation. Now we go down to the middle part of the plant. In the middle part here, we're gonna pull another one. Okay, same rules apply. Most defoliated goes, least defoliated goes, and we're left with this one. That's probably around 2% defoliated, if even. So if we average those two, right now we're at about 7%. And then we'll go to the bottom part of the canopy. So very bottom, we'll pull these off, and almost nothing on any of these leaves. So we can remove the least and most, and we've got a 0. So we're probably around 5% or less defoliation, well below the 20% threshold. But looking at this canopy, you would be hard pressed. You know, lots of people go, oh, I definitely need to treat. And in the top part, we're getting close, but taking into account that whole canopy, we're quite a ways away from threshold. The other key thing is we tend to focus on Japanese beetle because we can see it, but there are a lot of other things out in soybeans. So we've got grasshoppers all over the place out here. People will be seeing them in their fields. We were looking at silver-spotted skippers earlier. There's a whole bunch of defoliators, and that actually speaks to how we evaluate them. We want to know what's there. Between beetles and caterpillars, there are a lot of differences in terms of potential going forward into the amount of defoliation. So a sweep net in a field is a great way to know what you have in the field, not just Japanese beetle, but am I seeing other things? And then on top of all this is the weather. So if it's hot and dry, we're not likely to see a lot of entomopathogenic fungi or bacteria knock these populations down. But if it gets wet, that tends to get to those populations, can kill them, or at least knock them down. And so you'll start to see caterpillars kind of drooping on plants, and that's free control. So no need to spray, but it is a bit of a waiting game, and really waiting for thresholds is the most important part.
If you'd like to learn more about this pest and some of the mitigation strategies that the experts are suggesting, we've added an informative link. Find that along with this story over on the Market Journal homepage. Well, that is about all the time we have for this week's show. As a reminder, if you missed one of our stories, be sure you're following the Market Journal team on social media and on our YouTube, where you can catch those segments. We hope to see you back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.